Welcome, Mimi Calter, Deputy University Librarian of Stanford Libraries, and David Leonard, who's leading the Boston Public Library. We're here at the Festival of Learning, and we're learning a lot about libraries and how libraries change learning and how libraries change the way we approach knowledge and we can access knowledge in times of digitization and in times of disruptions, of change, of new ways of accessing the potential of libraries and the way people get in touch with libraries as institutions, both on the academic side but also on the side of public libraries, who have their similarities but also fundamental differences probably that we could highlight at some point or delve in. Mimi Calter, what is the greatest opportunities that digitization brings for an academic library in these days?
Digitization has been a big focus of libraries for a little while now, and in spite of that, I think we're still only at the beginning of understanding the potential of what can happen when our collections are more broadly accessible, are available for use with things like machine learning and the strengths that a lot of these digital tools bring to do deeper analysis and review of the collections that we have. I've been talking a little bit today about some projects that we're doing to explore the possibilities of artificial intelligence and leveraging artificial intelligence tools on our digital collections to provide additional metadata, to try to identify, to try to do things like automated transcription and review of a lot of these handwritten and often very difficult to access archival collections. I think as we look at it, we have a lot of libraries with these deep collections. There's so much opportunity to leverage new technologies to make these materials more accessible.
A deep collection, would that be something that is not as easily accessible as other collections, or?
I think, especially as you start to think about historic collections, that you frequently face a lot of challenges. Although, frankly, even modern collections, you can have challenges around the availability of metadata. I know. As an aside, we have a lot of collections in Asian languages, in Chinese and Japanese, that we know we have limited access to. That they're frequently published in these large sets, and we only ever cataloged them at the set level. So that there's 100 volumes in the set, and we just don't even know what's in volume 27. So. There's opportunities with both historic and modern materials to find new ways to make collections accessible to people. But I think a lot of the focus has been on historic materials and how we can leverage technologies to not just digitize them, because you can scan something into a PDF and it's more available and can be used remotely and accessed. But taking things down to the next level and looking to we've been doing some interesting work with maps, and again we're still at the beginning stages of this, but trying to see what you can do to extract some of the information from the maps. So actually measuring actually understanding the names of the cities on the map and using things like geolocation and georeferencing to track changes in location or population size. There's a lot of data that's built into a map that is that if it's just a printed map, you need to sort of recollect and bring back together. So there's a lot of options.
I think most public libraries in the U.S. have some level of special collections holding, which really probably reflects the cultural history of their particular location.
Yes.
I know certainly for Boston and also for New York, which are two of the public libraries in the US that are also research libraries, with very extensive holdings that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. And I would agree that we're absolutely only at the beginning of what technology has enabled. and that's as a society as well as a library. We're really only 20 years into this information revolution, this new age of what is possible. And we're both as affected by that change and need to innovate in a way to stay relevant. But equally, it provides us new tools, as Mimi was just talking about, to unlock some of these collections that maybe were seen by one or two scholars a year who really knew what they were talking about. And so what's fascinating is, with a simple high-resolution scan, you can study a map or a piece of art or a manuscript in much more detail than you would ever been able to do with a magnifying glass, perhaps, and some other tool. And that's before we talk about the newer technologies that enable us to go even further and think about GIS for maps, or the ability to take, we're both working on various levels of transcription challenges, which is how do we take cursive handwritten letters and make those more accessible. Yes, you can take a scan and you can turn it into a PDF, but what can we really read cursive today? Can we understand this script? And the anti-slavery manuscript project at Boston Public Library, which is a collaboration with Zooniverse.org, has used crowdsourcing technology to rely on the public to help transcribe these scripted letters and turn them into readable, first of all, human readable,
right.
and then ultimately perhaps machine reading, where we can then search and see, well, if this individual was talked about in this letter, maybe they also showed up in another letter, or what else was going on in this in the city that's referenced by more than one document. Things you really wouldn't be able to do without the power of technology to help.
But then also it's a new community gathering around that possibilities of technology, because as you're saying, you're crowdsourcing people and you're trying to find people who would be able to read this as maybe it's part of their heritage or part of their knowledge. It's very specific knowledge that you have to pull into the library, whereas in the traditional way you would say, okay, the library is the temple of knowledge and it's the temple of, it's an archive, or it's a sort of, that's where you go to get knowledge. But it's sort of, I read from it's more of an exchange process going on, and certainly at the library in the academic sense, that's for the scholastic community, probably that was the case all the time. But then the public library, I would think that there's an innovation going on, because you don't walk into the library, get a book and take it home and you bring it back because you're interested in a specific issue, but you
right. But if you study some of the images of people working in libraries that go back to the 19th century, for example, we just had this experience in Leipzig where you have a student or a scholar with a pile of books next to them on the reading desk, but they're writing, they're writing their paper, they're writing their book. So I think. Yes, libraries have always been about books, and we certainly used to say books are just the beginning, and maybe digitization is just the beginning now as a way to think about it. But libraries have always been a place of creation, as well as in consuming information. Just the mode has changed, or the medium where we do that has changed. Although I think you are correct in saying that there's a very intentional way we now collaborate in ways that we used not to do so.
And I think it's absolutely true that the fact that the library now exists so much more in the digital realm gives us new opportunities to build community, and there are new ways that we are building community and bringing people together on projects like the transcription project is a great example. We've been doing some work on offering a literary prize that we offer, that we're bringing people together virtually and building community that way. There's a whole talk about the fact that the library exists. The library is not just a building. The library goes far beyond the boundaries of the building, and we're definitely building community in that realm. That said, the library as a place is still a very important thing, and is an important piece of building that community. I think we're still seeing community built by bringing people into the library. It's still a place, speaking with an academic library bent, it is still a place that is is not. It's an unaffiliated space, right? So you bring people from different departments, and you can have the physicist and the classicist together in the same room. You're bringing students together from across the campus. So it is a gathering place. It's a place where people come to see exhibits, to learn.
I think that's a shared value between both public and academic libraries. It is a gathering place for its community. We might define our communities differently because of our roles in society, but gathering places is absolutely crucial. In fact, despite the increased power of technology and the hyper-connected nature of our society, we're often more estranged from each other as human beings because of that. And so we're also finding a greater interest in thinking of the public library, probably the academic library, as the third space.
Yes.
It's not work,
Absolutely.
it's not home, and it's maybe better than going to the coffee shop or the mall or whatever else, but it's a shared third space that belongs to every part of that community. And so, people can just rub shoulders together, and that's so important in a way where many people are alienated from each other because of various trends or this hyper-connected reality that we live in.
Oh. So what's the new key aspects of this role of a curator of space as a librarian? You could call a librarian a curator of space and time for a public audience, or for an interested audience, or for a scholastic or academic audience. Is there key aspects that you've identified as leaders? I mean, you're
I think there's a mixture. Maybe it's the same for you. I don't know. There's a mixture between the spaces for the people, and so let people decide how they want to use the space, but at the same time offer interesting experiences, cultural experiences, educational or inspirational authors or people who will present on a topic. So it's really about getting the balance right between programmed space and unprogrammed space and opportunity.
We're seeing significant emphasis on, we're seeing an increased, at least, need for teaching space and program space. So we have a variety of teaching programs within the library, and even faculty from outside the library are looking for space to do teaching using library materials. And so we're looking at we're in the middle of planning for a big renovation of one of our library buildings, and that demand has come through loud and clear. Students also still want study space. Students really do look to the library as a place to come and work, and it is interesting to see how they feel differently about the library as a space than they would about a study room in the student union. The library has a feel to it, and there's an understanding of what happens at the library that is different. So I think we have that piece of there's something cultural there that is long established that we're bound to, and at the same time we are looking to build digital community. So we're developing. We have a whole series of online communications, and we have a Facebook page, and we have do a lot of things on social media where we're also starting to bring people together that way and see connections. And of course, the two interact, right? You do things in social media that bring people into the space, and that bring people and do things in the physical location that then attract people to some of your digital assets and digital resources.
I think it's more dynamic than it used to be. One used to think of the community as the community that maybe wouldn't change all that much, whereas I think today it's more serendipitous. People come together to work on a project together, and then they may stay involved or may not. And so there's a flexibility and a flow to that's important to both respect. And I do agree that libraries as respected institutions and sometimes trusted institutions have a role that we should be very careful not to squander as well in society. And that means respecting all viewpoints and being a convening space for people of all backgrounds. and in some ways it becomes, a secular sacred space in a way, which I think is a really important concept to try and preserve.
I see a very challenging aspect of your work here when you say that you have to deal with emergence and emerging new aspects of society and knowledge and how knowledge is shared. Right. But then at the same time, you seem to be one of the main things that you have to do at this space is protect it, and also protect its temple. Like, right, it still is the third space that needs protection. And I think what I knew tasks of a leader of a library or leading.
Well, I think it's any good leader is only as strong as the institution as a whole, and so to work with staff so that we have the shared vision of the library that's emerging is a big challenge, but essential to success. In terms of the role in society, Eric Kleinman is talking about libraries as part of civic or social infrastructure. The way we think about infrastructure as roads and bridges and utilities and electricity and so on. But at the social or civic level, a library is one piece, maybe the essential piece of this thinking of civic and social infrastructure. And that's an awesome responsibility to have to take on, or at least to be part of. And I think it's not something we can do alone. I think this requires us to have stronger and greater number of partnerships with organizations who are also involved in this work. Because I do not think we could do it alone, even if we even if we wanted to. And so it is, to use your words from earlier, much more about facilitation or curation of space or convening. That means if we're doing new things, we may have to stop doing some old things as well. And that's often very difficult.
That's a very nice thing.
Yeah, I don't think that's unique to libraries. There's always going to be that tension, between addressing the newest challenge and being a little bit on the cutting edge versus managing the process and the successful processes and procedures that you've had in the past, and not you can't be so afraid of changing the way you're perceived that you don't take advantage of these.
People still come to the public library to borrow physical books. In fact, children's literature, mystery, science fiction, biography are all growing areas of borrowing. They're huge on the digital front, but those are still areas of interest that are growing from people who want to borrow physical books. So there are some things we can't stop doing, as well as trying to do some of the new things.
And on that front, you see a real connection between digitization and interest in the physical materials. Once we have digitized something, it is much more likely that someone is going to want to come and see the physical. That's
a very interesting insight. Sometimes we've had the experience here with digitization projects that you pile up digital material and it ends up in some silo or in some corner and or some hard drive on somewhere without the app metadata.
Right. That happens too, right? And that's why the digitization piece really is only the first layer, and why we talked about only being at the beginning of it. Just having a digital version is not enough. A lot of the very traditional library processes have to be built up around it. You need it to be cataloged. You need metadata. You need metadata around it. You need some kind of schema for operating that metadata and having some sort of platform under which the material can be discovered. You need to preserve the material, and that is much more of a challenge with digital material than it is for physical material, although there's plenty of challenges with the physical materials too. But that whole process that is built up through libraries is just as relevant for the digital material.
I think I have a casual definition. You can only take it so far. The distinction between a pure archive and a library. The main mission of a pure archive is to preserve and maybe do some historical work, whereas the main mission of the library is to provide access to these materials. So whether it's the physical materials in one silo or digital in another silo, we're only going to be as good as how well are these materials being used,
Yes.
and in what context. So our mission always has to drive us to beyond just rudimentary access to let's make them come alive for people.
Would it be true to say plausible that all areas of work in the library are affected by recent changes or digitization changes and disruptions that we are witnessing in society in general, but also in the work environment that people usually worked in maybe 30 or 40 years ago?
And I think some more than others,
Yes.
some faster than others.
Right.
Yeah.
If you start with the early days of the catalog going online, that's really the first real technological move within libraries. And certainly everybody who works with cataloging, like whether that's metadata today or acquisitions, that's certainly affected. Our shipping department is affected. Our buildings still need to be cleaned, and maybe that's an area where it's a lagging indicator when it comes to technology adoption. I think the one area where general reference is probably well served by the internet in a way that is pretty easy to use and fast to use. But any more detailed reference or research work, you may need a broader range of resources and maybe an expert to help you than a simple search and a search engine would work with. So I think we're all still working through, again, early in this technological revolution and information age, what is the best combination of the in-person and the online or digital.
So bridging the gap between the media versions of a medium content, call it in the publishing world.
And using each tool in the way that it is best. Yeah, that optimizing the use of both the physical and the digital.
Do you have a personal vision of what you would like to achieve for Stanford Libraries within the next 10 or 20 years, or a personal wish, something that is really at the core of your work and heartfelt?
So the library's mission is focused around the support for teaching, learning, and research at the university. Although the university is overall focused on teaching, learning, and research, so our mission falls from the larger university mission. We've just in the past 2 years, a year and a half, even been part of a program to define some of our library values and our core areas of focus. So we are focusing on accessibility of our materials. That means a lot of different things, and what specific projects that's going to bring about is something we're still discussing and looking into. I think I want to see us focus more on communications. This is something that we have been looking at a little bit more specifically, particularly as we've had just in the general political climate has become challenging in a lot of ways. The ability of the library to communicate both internally and out to our patrons is something we need to be looking at again. So I'd like to see us have a stronger communication flow. And then, we are looking at our physical spaces. I think, space is important. I've mentioned one renovation project, but we've got several that are underway. We're looking at how we're managing our collections, but we're particularly looking at what those physical spaces, mean. And I don't think we've fully captured that vision, other than, my personal vision is that we are collaborative and engaged in a lot of community outreach as we develop what those next phases are going to be.
No.
Yeah, I don't think we're that different at the end of the day when it comes to the value of libraries. I'll give you 3 key areas where over the next 5 to 10 years we expect to make a lot of progress. One is on the collections front, and that continues to focus on preserving the physical collections, making as much as possible available digitally, and then activating the use cases for those collections for our patrons. The second relates to our spaces. We're a central library with 25 branches across the city of Boston. And through the financial commitment and support from the Mayor Marty Walsh, and the City of Boston, we currently have a $130 million investment in renovating spaces across the city. And so the work of executing on that will take us a good 5 to 7 to 10 years to do. And then I think the third relates to iterating the service area, where what we bring to the public, which they are asking for, is more ways of ensuring we're an institution that removes the barriers to opportunity in society for whatever your concern is, whether it's about civic engagement, political engagement, looking for housing for those who are dealing with the challenges of homelessness or other social issues in their lives. And so those are really the three big areas where we have a great opportunity to. We've always done this in a small way, so it's not completely new, but to really own and be very intentional about how we can play a role around collection spaces and the civic role. I think that's the big thing for us in the next period.
I've just this impression that it might lead to a little bit of a deconstruction of the ivory tower, with a more of a flow of knowledge and competence and exchange between all areas of all walks of life and people from all kinds of societic strata that may more and more easily become sort of included into the exchange process that was not.
Yeah, I'll give you I'll meet your analogy of an ivory tower with a different one from our founders back in the 1840s.
Yes.
The concept was of creating a palace for the people. And so, if there were towers made of ivory or granite or block, it was still supposed to be open and publicly accessible. And that vision then shows up in the permanent home of the Boston Public Library in Copley Square with our 1895 building, which takes a lot of its inspiration from European architecture to really make real this palace for the people. And the for the people part is probably more important than the palace part, particularly for today.
And the parallel on my end is the concept of the library as the heart of the campus. It has you hear it referred to that in a number of different ways, and we still do see ourselves as a central. This gets back to the convening, gets back to bringing people together across departments, but we strive to be the place that people come together, that information flows freely, and that we reach out at the little veins reaching out across the campus.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Without trying to be all things to all people.
Indeed.
And that's where I think the opportunity for partnerships really enables us to execute on this broader vision. Because you try to be all things to all people, you ultimately fail. But if you can be a convener or a facilitator with strong partners who have deep expertise in things that are outside your own core competence, then that's the recipe for success.
Wonderful. Well, which makes you again the managing expertise expert for managing the flows and the flows of interests.
We didn't say it was easy. Right?
No.
Well, okay. Well, David Leonard and Mimi Calter, thank you very much. We've had a really great talk, and really excited about your presence at the Festival of Learning this year, and I hope that we'll continue to exchange ideas and projects and projections of the future and visions of your work, and maybe our house, the Deutsch-Amerikanische Institut, the German-American Institute, as some put it. We're here at the library, and there's no better place I could imagine talking to somebody like you at the DIA library.
Good to be here. Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
And off the record, thank you. That was
That was pretty good.
I thought you did pretty well. I was happy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You may have a little editing to do.
Yeah, we'll do very little editing. Yeah, hardly anything. We usually just.
Yeah.
Are you happy? Are you happy with specific ideas about?
Yeah, good conversation.
Where we nothing to cut out, like nothing explicit that you. Yeah, I've had this situation before. It's like, oh, this is that's wonderful.
Great. I suppose we should go down and
Thanks,
catch the
we
end.
should
Yeah,
go
catch
down
the
and
end.
see the other talks. And-
Oh.